Okay, so in this lecture we are going to focus on the idea that project teams are human systems, just as many other human systems that we know. For instance, uh, families, sports teams, organizations, nation states, countries, human systems. So we're looking at both the human component of that and the systemic component. Um, and the the underlying theory here comes from general systems theory, open systems theory, and as well as Kurt Lewine's force field theory. Much of this also then based on the way in which Yvonne Akazarian has integrated this into her theory of living human systems. Okay, first of all, if we think of project teams as systems, it's a very specific kind of system, and it's a human system, but that is also temporary. Of course, we can say that, and it is true, that all human systems are temporary, because we live, we get born, we live, we die. Organizations get founded, they operate over a couple of years, some of them many years, but in the end, everything comes to an end. The difference with a project team is it is from the beginning fundamentally integrated in the conceptualization of the team that it will have a beginning and an end. Whereas often with our own lives, as well as with the lives of organizations, we also create the illusion that it's going to just continue on forever. We very often don't live as if our end is near. We kind of put that out of our minds and continue living. Same with organizations. But in a project team, the reality of the temporariness of everything is very core to the life of the project team. And I think that is part of where project teams also get their life energy from, is knowing that there is an end gives a lot more urgency to the time that we are together and working on the project, meaning you can't just put something off for tomorrow. It needs to be done now because this thing has a limited time. Also, in terms of time being limited, gives us a clear view of the project life cycle, which is something that you are very familiar with. And then in the project life cycle, it means the project team goes through different developmental stages in its life. And if you want to make sense of the dynamics, the behavior, the things that are working, the things that are not working, if you want to make sense of these things in your project team, you also have to keep in mind, where is this team at the moment in terms of its life cycle? Because against that backdrop, you can make sense of the dynamics that you are observing. Something else about project teams and organizational systems as well is that they are socio-technical systems. The socio component referring to the humanness and to the fact that it is a system that consists of different human beings that are interacting with each other. But it's not only humans interacting with each other and relating to themselves and their own ideas, fantasies, fears, wishes, abilities, competencies. It's also human beings in connection with the technical world. In the picture here, I show a man or a woman, a motorcyclist on a machine. So the dynamic interaction between the human component and the physical, mechanical, technical component. We can think of an example. Let's say the internet is down there where you are working. So something in the technical world has happened, and immediately it also has an effect on the way in which people will interact and relate. So if we want to make sense of what is happening in the project team, we have to keep in mind that everything is influencing everything else. And so whether it's the human component and the humans on each other, or whether it's the technical component within which they are interacting. We also have to acknowledge that all human systems are imperfect, and we all come from a history of belonging to imperfect human systems. The fact that we are all coming from a history of imperfect human systems, let me just illustrate that a little bit. None of us come from a perfect family. None of us went to perfect schools. And very often these imperfections that we've experienced as we grow up, as we are interacting with our very first human system, which is our family of origin at a time when we are still very small, those imperfections very often form part of the very first organizing principles in our minds, according to which we perceive, experience, absorb, and relate to the world around us. And then these initial organizing principles again determine how new information regarding people, humans in interaction, authority, my place in the world, all new information gets organized according to the original organizing principles. Sometimes we have transformative experiences that help us rearrange those initial let's say maps of meaning making that we have in your minds. But as we go through life, we go to school, we have our first job, and in all of these places we experience certain aspects of what it is to be human in connection with other humans in systems that are put together to achieve things. And as you arrive with your new project team, you have to keep in mind that everyone in that team come from a history of having belonged to different human systems that were all imperfect. And here you get together as a team, and guess what? Whatever you will do will not be perfect. It will hopefully be good enough. But it's our endeavors as imperfect human beings, interacting as good as we can, but knowing it will not be perfect, in order to do what we need to do. Move something from point A to point B, whatever the project team's goal is. We often fall for the fallacy that the team has to be ideal, and then we create this picture in our mind of if it's a team context, the ideal team, it must be like this. If it's not like this, shame on you. And with that, that ideal can often become a burden because it loads us up with guilt and shame if we make a mistake, for instance. And if that's the case, it means the team cannot put all the information it has to have on the table, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because team members are often afraid that if they now add into the conversation that they think they made this mistake, if there's a culture in that team of mistakes not being tolerated, or someone will come down like a ton of bricks onto the specific team member, the mistake or the error will rather be hidden, meaning that there's less information on the table for the team to make proper decisions. So it's only to the extent that we can own up to the fact that we are imperfect people, doing the best that we can, but there will be mistakes. If we can't own up to that, it means we can't make all our efforts, whether they are good or not good enough, speakable, so that the team can think about it and think about ways in which to mitigate. Otherwise, we are continuously trying to either hide the things that are not going so well. Maybe I'm going to rather hide the fact that I'm a little bit behind schedule. I don't want my project manager to know this, so I'm not saying anything. Or there's something that I don't know that I need assistance with, but I don't want to say that I need assistance with this, because then they're going to see that I'm not this perfect engineer that they thought I was. So just stay quiet and hide that. Of course, you can see it's obvious that hiding the fact that you don't understand something or that you want some information detracts from the team's ability to move forward towards its task. There's this nice line in a song by Leonard Cohen where he says there's a crack in everything, and that is how the light gets in. So very often, by acknowledging where something is not right, allows space for the light to shine on that piece that is not the way it should be in order for that to be improved. So if you can have if you can start building your project team and also in your mind as a system where we know it's imperfect, but let's just get all the imperfect pieces on the table so that we can at least look at it and see where we can improve. If you can do that, then the team can get a culture of continuous improvement, introspection and improvement. And of course, it's much easier for team members and the team to really introspect and see what can be improved if you keep in mind that the team is a system, meaning every component is affecting every other component. So, behavior and human dynamics, they manifest through a person's actions or through the actions between. So personally or interpersonally, you see conflicts emerging, or let's say task delivery that falls behind schedule. There's one specific person or persons that were busy with a specific task and then it falls behind schedule. Things that go wrong in a system manifest somewhere in the system, but the fact that it manifests in place X doesn't mean that that is also the origin of whatever didn't go so well. So by viewing the team as a system, we acknowledge from the outset that everything that happens in this team is a result of everything else. And the team also sits within a systemic context. The team is also a subsystem of an organization and other, a whole hierarchy of systems, and which is also impacting and affecting everything that happens, including what happens in the micro situation within the team itself. So if I very often, let's say in other types of systems, let's say in a financial system, there's or in a software system, you see a mistake or an error manifesting somewhere, but then we are trained to go and look throughout the entire system to see what are the things that went wrong where, for us to see this one error mistake manifesting in a specific point. But very often in a human system, we are a bit lazy with our analysis, and I think it's because human systems, our emotions are very much part of the entire system, and our emotions then override our ability to just critically and analytically take a reflective and analytical stance and say, well, you know what, the anger that I'm feeling now is caused by what person X is doing at the moment. But in my analytical mind, then to keep in mind that whatever person X is doing now is not only because they want to make me angry or there's something wrong with them, they are incompetent or their personality is just wrong or their attitude. It is, if the person X is part of a system and they're part of the system that I am part of and that many others are part of, it means that all of us in some way, we may not yet be aware of it, but in some way we are contributing to a situation that allows a specific behavior to manifest in a specific point in the system. And if you can keep that in mind, that we are all interacting and contributing to what's happening in the system, then it's easier for all of us to own up to the contributions that we are making to whatever we see is not working so well. Also, we view the project team and the organization as an open system, meaning this organization stands in relation to a wider context. There's an exchange, there's something going in to the system, inputs, and then there's stuff happening here as we process work, and then we deliver something out again to the external environment. So it's always a system that's open, things coming in, affecting us, we affect whatever came in, and then we put it out there. So inputs, processes, and outputs is very much part of how organizations functions, and it's a core part also of our project team functions. And all of that is contributing to what you observe in your team, and that affects the way in which your team performs. Okay, so I touched on this briefly before, but I want to focus on the isomorphic nature of systems in a hierarchy. What this means, okay, let's first look at systems in a hierarchy. Your project team is a subsystem of, let's say, your organization. The organization is a subsystem of the industry. The industry is a subsystem of maybe the country that you are in. So we can see from the world globally, systemically, every system has a system above it and a system below it. In the team itself, if you just think of the team itself, if you look at the team as a whole, within this team, there are subsystems. There maybe are sub-teams, but there are also people holding roles. So the role is a subsystem of the team. It's a subsystem of the organization. If we look at this class, for instance, this class is the MPM Group A in the module project organization. So this class is, of course, a subsystem of the module, because there's another class as well. There's Group A and Group B, or you may be in Group B. If this class is Group B, then you are part of the class IHR 801, project organization, but you are in a subsystem of that class, MPM A or MPM B. Also within your MPM A or B, you are in little groups. So the group is a subsystem of the class, is a subsystem of the module. The module, of course, is a subsystem of the MPM program, which is a subsystem of the engineering faculty at the university. Well, the engineering faculty, again, is a subsystem of the University of Pretoria. It's a subsystem of the higher education sector in South Africa, and also the broader engineering industry, and so forth. So it's very clear how things that happen on one systemic level has an impact on what's happening on the other systemic levels. And just the fact that we are having this class online is, of course, also a function of the fact that we have had COVID-19 since last year, and which impacts the fact that we are now not having classes in person, but we are having classes online. So something happened at a very high level globally, systemically, impacting laws being made for higher education, impacting the University of Pretoria's drive to still keep its doors open, continue learning, make use of technology. Remember, we are socio-technical systems, and then giving directions to the different departments as to what to do in order to make sure that classes can continue, albeit not in person. All of these things. What's nice about viewing systems in a hierarchy, and this idea is very nicely described by Yvonne Agazarian in her work, is that if you say, so a system, we set systems as inputs and outputs. In a hierarchy, it means the output of one system becomes the input of another. So the decisions made by the University of Pretoria impacts the decisions, then it becomes an input into the decision-making program of the engineering faculty, which becomes an input into my planning for this lecture, because certain decisions have been made over there. So the output of one system becomes the input of another system in this systemic hierarchy. And what it means is, over time, you can start to see that there's a similarity in systems in a hierarchy in terms of how they function and in terms of how they structure themselves. And what it means is, if you view the system very carefully and you take note of the how the system operates and how the system is structured, you can start to make hypotheses about what may also be happening in the systems below the system and in the system above the system. In an organizational context, I often see with clients, so when I work with executive teams, the executive team will say, you know what, we need some work on employee engagement with our staff. There's something in staff that's not right, and we need you to focus there. And then, of course, if the staff is part of an organizational system of which the executive team is also part of the system, we need to ask the question, what is the impact that the executive team has on what we are observing on lower levels in the organization? And very often, once the executive team get to a point where they can acknowledge the fact that they are an imperfect human system, that they have a lot of power and influence in determining whatever is happening in the systems below them, and they start to take a close look on their own feelings of engagement or disengagement, their own frustrations, their own misgivings, they can start to look at that and own that. We often see that they can see that this, what they're observing here, is pretty much the same as what they are also observing in the systems below. With the only difference is if you can own up, it means they can make the decisions that can already start to impact and influence the rest of the systems in this hierarchy. So you can't ever look at your project team in isolation as if it is not related to other systems. Your project team is within a systemic context. It sits in a hierarchy of systems, and whatever happens on any level in this hierarchy affects everything else, and also just on the hierarchical level of your team itself, whatever happens there is again a function of the different components that are making up the team, and having this systemic view in mind is what we need in order not to scapegoat people, to say, well, it's staff who are disengaged, or it's this person who is incompetent. We have to take back all that kind of scapegoating energy and say, well, if it's a system, it means it can't only be this person, it can't only be staff, it must be me as well, because I'm also in the system. What am I doing or not doing? What am I saying or not saying? When am I keeping quiet? When I see that someone is being picked upon, but I keep quiet because at least they're not picking on me. But just in keeping quiet, it means I contribute to perpetuating a pattern in that team where the mistakes all get projected onto one component of the team. Now everyone else can feel that we are all okay, and the fantasy is if we can just cut this bad part out of the team, then things will be better. Then often we do that. We see the person leaves, but the dynamics stay the same. So the dynamics can't change if it's not owned and worked with in a way that acknowledges that the team is imperfect, we're trying our best, we're all impacting each other, we're in relation to other systemic systems in this hierarchy, and all of this is impacting each other. Okay, another part of thinking systemically about teams and organizations is to be able to view the system as having a boundary around it. So a boundary that demarcates what is in the system and what is out of the system. In the picture here, you see the Great Wall of China, of course, clearly demarcating what is inside China and what is outside of that. And so all countries have boundaries. All organizations have boundaries in terms of who is in and who is out, what is part of the organization's task and what is not. And same with your project team, who is in the team, who is outside of the team. On a micro level, one can think of an individual, so let's say, so me as an individual, I have my skin. Whatever is inside my skin is part of me. Whatever is outside of my skin is not part of me. And the same with the team. Once we have this concept in mind of the outer boundary of the team, we can also see that sometimes this outer boundary is a bit more permeable than at other times. Sometimes it's a bit more rigid, and sometimes it's a bit more permeable. The more permeable it is, the more information is allowed across the boundaries of the team. Information in, and again information out. The more rigid the outer boundary of the team, the more difficult it is, or the less information is coming in and going out. Very often, teams are reluctant to allow information in that seems a little bit too different or too strange. So the boundary will become a bit more rigid when different information that it is not used to is trying to get in. And then the boundary becomes more permeable when the information seems more familiar and less threatening to the inside of the system. So if you think about change processes, for instance, and the resistances towards change, change has to do with new information coming in, and then the new information needs to be integrated by the team in order for the team to change the way it functions and the way it is structured in order to now adapt to the new information. But if the resistance to the new information is too high, usually when the information is too different, so the information may be allowed in, but once it's in, the resistance in the team may cause that information to be kind of nullified or sent out again, or sometimes kind of safely locked or kept safe in a small pocket in the team in order for the new information not to really impact the team. If you think of a bank, for instance, a bank that wants to buy a new small innovative company in order to bring some innovation culture into the bank. So the decision makers may decide this new innovative company crosses the boundary into the bank, but then once it's there, it's possible that the rest of the mother organization feels too threatened about this new piece coming in, or envious towards the innovative things that the new piece may do, and also want to protect the integrity of what is known, and then sometimes they can kind of seal it off, lock it somewhere, and in order to disallow too much change to happen, or sometimes they can completely swallow the new information in order to nullify its potential impact. We often see then that small companies get bought by big companies, and then they lose their ability to be innovative once they start to become part of the larger organization. We also see this with racial and gender integration into organizations. Therefore, we have programs such as diversity and inclusion in order to see that that which seems too different can also be heard and taken in and allowed to affect change in behaviors and perceptions on the inside. Another important characteristic of systems to keep in mind is that within each systems, there are both forces present that want to maintain homeostasis, or in other words, that want to keep things the same, not wanting things to change, to keep things the way they've been, stability, predictability, etc. And there are also forces that want to move the system towards transformation. It's as if in each living system, the system is aware that for the system to survive, it needs to remain stable enough to be sustainable, but it also needs to interact with its environment and change and be alive in order to survive. If, for instance, if on the micro level again, if I close myself completely off to my external environment and I don't breathe, I will die. So the system needs to be alive, living, transforming, changing in order to have life and growth. But the system also has to be intact enough, to be predictable enough, also in order to survive. So these forces are working with each other, against each other. There's always this tension between the desire to keep things the same and the knowledge that things can't be completely the same forever. Then the system won't be able to adapt to its environment and it will die. So it has to also change. But then change very often brings the system to a place that seems too unfamiliar and scary, and then the system will give a couple of steps back towards things that are a little bit more familiar. I think you will see this in your teams as well. When there are new processes, new policies, or a new kind of project, innovative things to do, that there are always these different forces and counter forces that are being evoked. Forces towards change, but also simultaneously forces towards homeostasis or stability. In the picture here, you see I've took a picture of the military on the one hand, wanting to keep things the same, and young people, students in the Chinese context, who are fighting for change and transformation. This is a very a kind of overt, external, visible way of depicting these forces, but the forces underlying this is present in all human systems, whether you talk about a family or a team or an organization or a country. Always systems towards change, forces towards change, as well as forces towards stability. Every human system, or actually every living system, has an intrinsic desire to grow and develop. But it is also met with obstacles from the outside, or sometimes obstacles or resistances from the inside. And as a manager of a team, in order to know where to intervene, so let's say in your team's growth, there is a resistance, either internal or from the outside world. In order to think of where to intervene, it's usually much more effective to intervene on the side of the obstacle to try and weaken the forces that are blocking the growth, rather than intervening on the side of the intrinsic forces towards growth. Because if you make the force towards growth stronger, the force towards the resistance will just also become stronger in order to get that equilibrium of forces. So the harder you push, the harder the pushback is. But if you can work on the side of the pushback and weaken that, then the natural forces towards growth are released immediately in order to then have the growth. Let's say your child doesn't want to get dressed for school. Now you can either force your child like a bulldozer and say you have to get dressed for school because and all the reasons, which is not necessarily going to help, because the resistance against doing that will just increase as well. You can rather pick the child up and forcefully put the clothes on and forcefully drag her to the car and put her in the car. But by all the way while you do that, you will be very aware of the fact that you are bulldozing over an intrinsic resistance. Another way to work in that instance is to not try and force the issue, but rather to work on the side of the resistance. So you will ask the child, what is it about? Why don't you want to go to school? And then she may tell you a story of what's happening at school, what are the things there that she doesn't like. Also, just the act of listening and hearing what the resistance is about means, as the project leader, you actually provide a containing space for these emotions of resistance to be spoken, to be heard, to be thought through. And in a way, what you do is you diminish the power that this force has in terms of working contra to what is required for the system. And often then, the moment you do that, contain that energy, listen to it, it means the energy of the force goes down, and then the force that works towards going to school, getting dressed, seeing my friends, can be released and starts to have the desired effect anyway. Okay, so these were a couple of thoughts regarding teams as systems, and these are the most important things that you need to keep in mind as you work towards your assignment, in assignment and for the exam as well. First of all, that all teams are human systems. It means they are imperfect. There's an interconnectedness between the parts in a system, and also between the system and its external environment. There are boundaries at play, boundaries across which systems are working. Sometimes these boundaries are more permeable than other times. And also then growth and transformation versus keeping things stable and the same, and working with that within a systemic context. Okay, thank you.